Okay, we're on to another moral decision rule. This one, integrative social contract theory, has the most exciting name, clearly. We didn't have room on the slide even to mention the authors, who are Donaldson and Dunphy. This theory was developed for global business. It's an ethical theory that was, kind of tailored to do the kinds of things that we do as business people. So if you notice, it's got these kind of complex words in the title. So what does it integrate? It integrates kind of global norms and local norms. So we'll see how that fits together in a minute. But that's why it's called integrative social contract theory. Social contract theory means that it's created by people who come together to form a moral agreement. So a lot like Rawls did with his theory, we're now doing this in a more global sense of a group of people coming from around the world to create a social contract. So let's jump into the decision rule, and then we'll talk about it. We'll dig around in a little bit. So the decision rule is that you have to check to see if your potential action violates either an authentic norm or a hypernorm. So one is global, one is local. Okay, so let's start with the global. Does it violate a global hypernorm? The people who come together say, we're going to come up with some rules that all of us will agree we will all follow around the world because we all kind of believe in them anyway. So if their religions and their philosophies and their histories and their cultures all kind of say, we think cannibalism is bad, for instance, they can say, okay, there's some nugget of common morality in there. So Donaldson and Dunphy developed, from looking at kind of a hypothetical situation like that, they come up with what they consider to be two key hypernorms. And the first one is that you need to respect the dignity of all human beings. So you need to decide how you can do that in the best way, right? If you're considering an opportunity to take a certain action and you think, there's some people who could be harmed in that decision, and it wouldn't reflect your respect for their dignity, then to violate a hypernorm is an immediate no-go, right? So you'd say, well, I'm not going to do that. I shouldn't do that. The other hypernorm is that you need to respect human rights. So human beings have a certain list of human rights, basic human rights that you need to follow. If it would violate those, again, it's a no-go. So you consider both respecting dignity and respecting human rights. Aside from that, what they're arguing you should do is to care about what's going on in the local economy, in the local environment. So context matters in this theory. So you know that you're not going to violate rights, violate human dignity. You go off to a new country to do business, and you look around to find out what the local norms are. So if it doesn't violate a hypernorm, and it's in sync with a local norm, then it's ethical behavior. So how do you figure out these local norms? It's an interesting test, really, because you want to make sure that the people in that local area approve of you if you do that behavior, okay? And a trickier one, you have to think about whether or not they would disapprove of you if you don't do that behavior. So that's a pretty strict question, right? It's like it's actually expected of you that you will behave in a certain way. And the third characteristic is that almost everybody there does it. So as a business person, you have to be able to kind of survey the local community, check out what the local business community does, and then act like them, as long as it does not violate a hypernorm. So you're getting into both a combination of, what do our philosophies and beliefs tell us to do on a global basis, and just kind of looking around and fitting into the local culture on a more local basis. And that's, it's a tricky thing to do, and we'll be talking about that again in a minute. So the biggest pro of this theory is considered to be its kind of adaptability, that you care about the local culture. You're not like running around the world as some like ugly American business person saying, well, where I come from, we do it like this, and looking down your nose at people who do not do things the same way, right? So it gives you a little more respect for local cultures. It helps you to kind of see how other people live and to do things in a way that's not all American, because we're not necessarily always right, especially according to some of these other countries. So we're going to respect these other cultures' norms within these limits of the hypernorms. The biggest con that people talk about is that it's really hard to figure out what those local norms are. You're kind of prepared. Donaldson and Dunphy give you the two hypernorms, and then you're prepared with those in your mind, all written out. You go to a local environment, and if you're from another country, it's very difficult to kind of parse out what it is that the local norms are. How do you really know that if you did this thing, most people would approve, and if you didn't do it, they disapprove, and almost everybody does it? It's one thing that I always find when I talk to students who are from other countries. It's much easier for an American to know what American norms are, and for Mexican students to know what the Mexican norms are, and for German students to know what the German norms are. So it's one of those things that if you're kind of bathed in the culture, it'll be a lot easier to find out what's going on, or to recognize what's going on in terms of those local norms. The biggest issue, as I said, is the vague nature of those norms. But keeping in mind, one issue that comes up with that too is like your individual beliefs can get a little rocky, because if you agree kind of with the American norms that you live with, you respect the hyper norms, and you say, I really believe in these American norms, and then you go to another country and you're supposed to leave those beliefs at home and behave in a way that's in concert with these local norms in another country, that can leave you kind of at odds with some of your personal beliefs. So that's something that's important for an individual to kind of determine if you're comfortable working in certain other countries, and maybe you're not working for the right company if they're doing business in a country where it just kind of violates your personal beliefs. An example of this is the Levi Strauss underage workers that were in Bangladesh. They found that they were hiring children, essentially, under 15, under 14, to do sewing, to do construction work on clothing. And that's something that American consumers and American activists just thought was completely unethical. So Levi Strauss had to decide how they were going to handle it. It's like if you were to look at this from the perspective of integrated social contract theory, you might say, first, does it violate a hypernorm to be hiring these students, these children? And if it violated a hypernorm, does it violate the children's dignity? You might think it does, you might think it doesn't. I think generally Levi Strauss thought it didn't. But the local people also thought it didn't, but the activists disagreed with them, right? Does it violate their human rights? If you look at their list of human rights, you could think it did or didn't, depending on your interpretation. In that country, it was not a violation of an authentic norm, even though in the US it would be a violation of an authentic norm. So how does a company kind of deal with a situation like that? So what Levi Strauss did is they said, hey, this is an issue. We agree that it's an issue. They took a position on it. They said, we're going to take these kids off the worker roles. We're going to put them in school. We will pay for it. When they get to the appropriate age, which I believe is 15, we're going to put them back in the factory if they want to be, and they can start making money for their families again. So it was kind of a little bit of a win-win, that the students got to make the money and get the schooling and therefore not work. The activists also were appreciative that Levi Strauss had come up with a solution that made everybody happy, essentially. Again, it was very expensive for Levi Strauss to do this, so that leaves us with the open kind of shareholder question. So it's a win-win outcome that I think through the lens of integrated social contracts theory makes a little bit more sense than it would if you just were kind of looking at it without any structure. So that's the fifth of our moral decision rules. We have one more coming up. Thanks.